Thank you so much, Diana. So again, I'm Binh Danh. I'm an artist and also an educator. I teach at San Jose State University. Of course, we have our three fabulous artists here, as well as curator. So I'm going to just start off with about the title of the show, A Search and Slants of Light. And it's a poem by Emily Dickinson's an 1861 poem, and I'll just read it to you. I don't have a poetic voice, but hopefully I'll do it justice. There's a search and slants of light, winter afternoons that oppress us like the heath of cathedral tunes. Heavily hurt it gives us, we can find no scars, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it any, 'tis the sealed despair, and imperial affliction send us of the air. When it comes to the landscape, listen, shadow holds their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distant on the look of death. So Arielle, how do you settle on this title and pairing up the two artists' work?
Yeah, well, thank you, Binh, for the reading. So I do think a lot about poetry in relation to photography and end up looking at poems often just in my own work or in my teaching. And I think I'm particularly drawn to poems that create kind of a visual image when reading them. And this poem stood out to me because of its reference to this slant of light that, in my understanding of the poem, it's got this weight to it. It's kind of heavy and brings this understanding to the author that's kind of sheds new meaning on their understanding of the world, on religion. And it brings this kind of like this sense of despair, but also there's something somewhat majestic and mesmerizing about it. And I particularly love the last stanza. And it was that last stanza that really kind of sealed the deal for me in choosing this for a title. I love that it says, so I'll just read it one more time. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. So I read that as this slant of light kind of makes everyone pay attention, the landscape included, and it's mesmerizing and kind of captivating and freezes the landscape. And it's actually that sense of despair that it brings is that it's temporary and that it's fleeting and going to go away. And that's that last sentence, what that means to me. So in choosing that for the work, I was really thinking about how both of these artists work with light in such a way where they make it a material that they use and also part of the subject matter and the concept of the work. And I just felt like it was such a fitting title for that reason, for this attention to light that kind of sheds meaning on something. And I think both artists in their work are working with beauty, but in this kind of way that's very complex to talk about more challenging and difficult things, which I think the poem does as well. So both artists are thinking about changes to the climate that are devastating and kind of destructive, or kind of change over time, loss and death, but they're doing it in a way that is, I think, similar to this poem, that is kind of balancing this beauty and this struggle at the same time. So yeah, that's why I chose this one, why I was so drawn to it, and still like come back to it often.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the slant itself, because I think that's such an interesting way to think about light. And it's like light at an angle in a way, you know, and when light becomes an angle, it also produces like a volume in some way. And how was it curating the work, the two artists were, like the process of curating, making basic volume out of this work and for this installation here. And I was also reading up your process as an artist too, because I was thinking, because you in your artist statement you wrote about walking, collecting, folding, wrapping. You know, those are all sort of activities in ways, And so yeah, talk a little bit about that, like the
Sure.
curatorial process.
Yeah, so
Like, how do you even pair these two artists together?
Yeah.
Was it the instruction from Diana, or was it someone you proposed?
Sure, yeah. Well, so I, when Diane and I kind of talked about curating the show, I had first wanted to make a show that was really touching on themes that's an extension of my own art practice. So you kind of touched on that. I am very much someone that's interested in more experimental photography, kind of thinking about ways of questioning the like traditional bounds of the photographic medium. So thinking about light and time, those like fundamental elements, thinking about the photographic frame, thinking about how the photograph exists in space, and all of those things are part of my own art practice and what I think about, but I wanted to approach curating with that in mind also, kind of this extension of my art practice. And I was familiar already with Anna's work and was introduced to Adrienne's work through Diane. And as I was kind of formulating this idea for a show that was about a photographic object or something that's photographic but kind of goes beyond that and kind of exists in this more sculptural realm or questions the materials that are being used, I thought that these two artists together would be a great pairing for that. And mostly because of the way that they include non-traditional materials, which we can kind of see across the board, and non-traditional ways of representing a photograph. So I'm thinking of kind of just immediately in my view here, the offering piece that is Adrienne's, kind of these shredded or torn pieces of cyanotype presented in this landscape format that comes from the wall. And then Anna's piece here that's working with an etched mirror, and where the reflection of the mirror onto the surface of the pedestal is very much a part of the work as well. So I think they were both artists that I think are touching on themes that I like to work in for my own practice, but in new and exciting ways to me. And so I wanted the challenge of kind of pairing their work together.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful comparing for sure. And there's, I think a lot of people probably walking here just don't even know which artist is who. It's sort of like it marries each other really well. I'm going to move on to another question. So I'm going to focus now on Anna and Adrienne. So let's discuss winter light as we head into the cooler months. Now, in Emily Dickinson's poem, those who know Emily Dickinson's recluse person, only published 10 poems while she was alive, and a lot of issues of depression. And I think, seasonal depression, winter time comes, it affects people a lot too. It didn't really affect me today because it was so warm.
Yes.
I was like, well, the light in California is a little different than, northeast New England, area. So, but I'm curious about how light affects your work. Thinking about the issues of religion, death, and despair. So Anna and Adrienne, both of you work on location where themes of religion, death, and despair have transcended. Adrienne, you photographed the remnants of the CZU lighting complex fires in the archaeologies of loss and longing. Anna, in your artist statement, you mentioned that you were shocked to witness the Rio Grande River dry up as far north as Albuquerque last summer. Mm-hmm. Can the two of you discuss themes of religion, death, and despair in your work? And so sorry for such a heavy question. I think of these sort of heavy moments, that we seek light and answer. So yeah, I'll let any of you start.
Okay. Well, I guess going back to the slant of light too, I think about that as winter light being kind of filtered through architecture and filtered through domestic spaces and kind of infrastructure. So I've been looking at light in that way, and I think the piece, it's called Search, closest to the window over there, is kind of, that is actually a light coming in my window and casting onto a print, and I'm rephotographing. so that's kind of just thinking about like that as a physical material that then layers itself into prints, and kind of like iterating with slants of light is kind of a good place to start. But about like religion, I think like more about a lot of my work, especially in here, and what I've been thinking about a lot lately is water and the Rio Grande, because I'm living in Albuquerque, and that's the closest body of water. And I think like water has always been a really spiritual part of my life. Like, of course, it's essential to everything, and essential to any part of life. But I also think of water as like a really beautiful way to kind of like submerge your body in and connect with your body, and this like kind of mix of pleasures and anxieties that kind of feel really healing to me. So I grew up on the coast in Massachusetts, and then I lived here for a long time, so like swimming was a big part of life. And then moving to an arid landscape, I just started like spending a lot of time at the river. But yeah, I think the piece that like speaks to this most is probably this "Nothing Without Each Other," and I call it that because when I saw the river dry up last summer, it was the first time since the 1980s, and there was a lot of news about it, and like a lot of people were going down to like look at it, and just I kind of thought of this question: what is a river without water? And like to see this really significant piece of water that's really political and like always moving and provides really all of the life to New Mexico. I took that piece of dirt from like a dried part of the riverbank, and the print that's on top of it is a water soluble photograph. So I kind of merged them together by dripping little drips of water onto them to kind of bond them together. But I also think about like if it were fully submerged in water, it would kind of dissolve and transform and like become something else. So I'm thinking a lot about like the death, or like maybe death as a transformation process. Yeah, and the light from above is kind of, I hope that they kind of engage in this way that they're like almost touching or almost connecting, but one is sort of a ghost of the other.
Death as transformation is something I've been thinking about and trying to articulate through my art process for many years, from actual physical death of my parents to early friends, but certainly with thinking of death, befriending death as a transformation. It's about motion, it's about energy, it's about matter turning into something else. I feel so lucky to have been curated by Arielle, because when I looked at your work, I thought, oh my goodness, I love what you're doing. And then Anna, with your work with transparency, I also work with transparency, but I'm working perhaps in the opposite direction, in the sense that I'm fixing the transparency. Mm-hmm. My work with the pewter slides are no longer transparent. They're now solidified, archived, archaeology, so to speak, which of course with your work with the mud itself is all about layers and transformation. Thinking about this piece, yes, because that was a common destruction to all with the fires that hit our area in 2020 of August. It was devastating. As you can see, the last thing that stands is the chimney, which is often the case with burned structures. And really thinking about how using the positive and negative space is really intertwined by that threshold of that plume of hair, which is like smoke or human presence or tethered. Which is which? It's a constant energy that is transforming. I do in my practice, and I think we have that in common in our practices. I ritually, talking about religion, big topic, but I'm very interested in ritual. So I return to that same location, and I have for the last 3 years, to document its transformation. And the property just got sold. Last week there was a digger that's building a new house. And I have lots of material to think about, but mostly that it gives me, I return to it like a little bit like a shrine. I know that might sound a little odd, but I check on it like I would a child or a favorite place or an old home. Even though that home wasn't my home, it's not my home, but I came upon it and was struck by it and felt like I had to witness what was going to happen there, and it is recovering. So I love how we all are working in this beautiful play of impermanence and ephemeral, and trying to capture it with that slant of light. Yes.
And I think returning to the ritual that you mentioned, and returning to a specific place, I feel like you have that in your work as well, where place is really important and carries that sense of, whether it's religion or just like this kind of connection, spiritual connection that warrants this ritual of returning and witnessing change over time. I feel like I'm interested in that in my own work also.
Yeah, I think that's a way to like get to know a place, like especially having moved somewhere new. I felt like it takes a little while to get to know a place, and by returning and like seeing it change and seeing like things grow, or even seasonal changes, I guess like on the bright side, although we're talking a lot about like despair and destruction and a lot of heavy topics, there's like 2 locations that feel kind of hopeful to me that I keep returning to. And one is the wastewater treatment plant, ironically. But this is a place that like transforms wastewater into clean water again, and it's actually the 3rd largest tributary of the Rio Grande. So this has been like a really fascinating point of interest that I'm going to, and kind of like spending time there and kind of communing, like even bringing prints to that location and kind of like letting the water manipulate the work. So yeah, that's a kind of an exciting place. And I feel like if you just go somewhere once, it's a much different feeling than like when somewhere sits with you for a while. Or yeah, it makes sense that you keep returning to this place.
I love the idea that you're offering your print to the water, or the lack thereof, and how that is, another kind of offering, or reverence, or and watching and seeing what happens to that print as you photograph it. And do you leave it there, or do you?
No.
I understand that you don't. I mean, I'm asking. Yes.
Yeah, I've thought of like there's another artist that leaves like work with seeds, and that's something that I've thought about. But I think like if I can't find a way to make it like giving back or like reciprocal, so I'm kind of like letting it make something and then taking it out and like leaving it to be
No, I understand.
At this point.
I think when we approach these areas of transformation and renewal, we don't want to add to any of the despair, right? Unless there's a way that really works to lift up the situation.
Yeah, and speaking about lifting up the situation, I mean, a lot of the work I see is commemoration too. And so I'm curious about, how do you see that within your work? I think, Adrienne, you were talking about this work. There's just also this positive, negative effect that's happening. I'm thinking about your slide project, which you could dive more into. Anna, you're talking about the river. You also, just like, and again, I'm not going to ask you whose hair is that, but I find the hair has a sort of bodily remnants as the mud. Is that mud, Anna? Is that right?
Yeah.
Mud from the Rio Grande River, right? There's like connection, and even in both of these 2 pieces, I'm definitely thinking about there's certain balance that's trying to take hold of or make to light. Like, there's obviously balance has to work out somehow, that the system stays within balance, that it doesn't go off balance. And of course, it's throughout our living moment at the moment, things are really off balance, right? So yeah, I was curious if any thoughts about that commemoration and balance.
I think my return to these places, working with the positive negative among the different art pieces here, is very much my process of acknowledging and revering what is lost and what could be. So there's also the imagination that is in play as well. Something that anchors you. You might be able to discern that, oh yes, that is a mirror over there, over here, but yet in its abstraction, going from the positive to the negative, it both solidifies it and commemorates it, but allows one to enter and meditate upon it. So in a sense, there is a kind of meditation with that imagery for me personally, and framed with the pewter so as to anchor both the eye, but also perhaps an initial entry point into interpreting the piece. The hair, yes, I've worked a lot with hair. Hair was the way that I could introduce the humanity in that devastation. I make a lot of prints with charcoal pigment made out of the charcoal found on location and run it through the etching press. The hair is of all kinds, from family members to a beautiful collection that is made from my salonist, that I frequent well too often. So so that's a collaboration. But I think the importance of the human hair is that it grounds us. It was a way for me to enter that scene, which was not my own, and tethers us. That the humanity is what tethers us to the underworld, to the upper world, the positive, the negative, life and death in this kind of cyclical situation. So that's how that's working for me. Yes.
I just love the pewter on the slide, and because one of the first photographic process, heliograph invented by Niepce in France, was a sheet of pewter coated with bitumen, which is a tar material.
Yes.
So it's kind of like the carbon material you're using too, the material, the black material that's exposed in a camera with 8 hours of light, and then the bitumen was washed off in lavender oil, and there's just one image, that just sits. So I love that connection to early days of photography that you presented in this work. So, tell us a little bit about the actual. So these are art history slides.
Yes, these are art history slides that were digitized by San Jose State University, which were then disposed of. So I think many of us probably grew up with slides or family slides, or if you're artists, you used to submit your artwork as copy slides to be considered by the viewer or the curator. So I love looking at them. I mean, they're beautiful. I collected them whenever I traveled for teaching purposes myself when I use slides. So I had to do something with them. I couldn't jettison them, and I began to contact print them as a way to preserve them in one way, and then fell in love with the play of the positive and negative of the imagery. I really enjoy testing my art history skills as I'm looking at slide to slide. These were slides that I found, so they're mostly Western, with some Grecian urns and some Egyptian locations, but they're primarily Western, the greats, so to speak, of Western art from the Renaissance on. So with the pewter was just a way to, so that's where I entered this realm of making cyanotypes, which then led me to casting them. And one thing led to another in terms of really preserving and archiving them in a new way. And it's very much an alchemy, it's magic. I don't know what will come of it, the slide after I cast it. And that is very, very exciting to me each time I do it. And there are many failures, of course, along the way.
Yeah, because once you cast them, they're no longer slides in ways.
Yes.
You also sort of like, because for slides to operate, there's a sense of gravity that has to take place where it drops and then push it back out. But in this case, now these are blocked, and they're just solidify them into the sculptural piece, which I find it fascinating.
And light can no longer pass through, and that's something I love about them too, is they once served this purpose as this kind of practical archival tool, and now because they're no longer transparent, they're now this kind of artifact, this object that has this new weight and this new significance as an art object, as a photographic art object. And I love just the way that the pieces are lit. You're reminded of that because the light can't pass through them. They instead cast shadows of their full form, which is just like something I love about the installation of them as well.
That might have something to do with the reflection off the pewter.
Okay.
So, there in theory should be another piece of glass. So these slides are cast in a fire-resistant glass, which allows them to survive the 450 Fahrenheit degree of the melting point of pewter. So sometimes they're boiled, and you can see that a lot boils, whether it be the plastic or the labels, and sometimes so there is some reflective matter back there. Yes.
Well, I want to move on to Anna about commemoration, and then going back to the idea of transparency. And I'm really looking at this piece again because in my vision, as well as some of the other pieces on the wall, where light is passing through windows, passing through. What is this material on the top? Is that like a transparency film?
Yeah.
So how does that how do those like kind of represent commemoration in the pictures you make? You know, these are actual places, and talking about boiling hot. I mean, the desert, the Rio Grande drying up, all that sort of comes into play.
Yeah, well, that one in particular has taken a few different forms depending on the space, and I really enjoy playing with different installations with that technique. But I think something I think about a lot is having the light not just be something critical in the making of a photograph, which of course, like all photographic processes require light in some form, and it's kind of a record, but kind of making the light an actual part of the experience of the work. So depending on where the light source is coming from, and that's something I think about just like with the sun, how we experience like light and shadows as the earth is turning, and like these kind of reminders of time and memory. And then in this case, I think about like this idea of evaporation and like water like transforming in different ways. So it's moving down the river, it's moving south with the Rio Grande, but also like is diverted in a lot of places, and thinking about these like channels where it gets kind of contained or diverted, or often shaped like geometric kind of triangles or diversion like channels in a way. So yeah, I'm thinking about that shape and its containment, but its also ability to shift depending on the light source. And another thing that comes to mind with commemoration is like I kind of just realized this as I was reflecting on this question as you're talking, Adrienne, but the idea of like pieces becoming little monuments in a way. So like here, and I think of your slides, like they become something solid that stands up on its own. There's another piece of mine that is kind of behind Catherine on the pedestal over there, but using like this privacy screen material. So this is like the material that we put on our phones or computers to kind of control like our neighbors from looking at our information. So I use that over a photograph, like a translucent photograph of, I call them like suns, just reflections of the sun on water, but thinking about like how you can control a single viewer's gaze to have this kind of special, like intimate experience versus, I think like some things I want to be communal experiences, but others I want to be kind of like a single experience with one person to kind of make it feel like, yeah, maybe, I don't know, the word commemoration comes to mind, or this kind of like special moment.
It is quite interesting that commemoration and memorial, it's sort of like a group activity too, once the public memorial. But then within that experience is very individual, as you described. So I do find that fascinating. Yeah, I'm also thinking about this other photograph, which is over the one with the, I forgot the name of it, but it's sort of like looks like a monitor. It looks like there's interference of a monitor, and do you remember the title of that?
Yeah,
piece?
I think it's called Memory of the Rio's Edge.
Oh, the Edge.
I think it's Edge.
It's right by Michael.
Okay, yeah, right.
Yeah,
Right, Michael.
Right there.
And it's also facing Adrienne's other picture, the one that right by the door, and they both sort of vibrate. They have this vibration when I look at it, and I'm just so curious about that energy of vibration, how that manifests in some of these ideas.
There is a sense of, there's a lot of energy and movement in these works, or the invitation to have your eye active. I mean, it takes work to look at the slide work, at the pewter slides. With Anna's piece that we're talking about now, there are all these layers and of what kind of reality. So there is this resonance and movement and energy that is happening in your piece for me. And likewise, I actually see it more in the offering piece.
Mm.
But if I'm going to follow your lead, Ben, on the piece of the woods, the Madrone Woods, right below the opposite wall, there is a ghostly quality to it. So there's that kind of depth and movement, like where is the forest? Is it the ghost of the forest? Is it and there's the materiality. Even though that your image is 2D and my image is 2D, there's this materiality already in play, which I think is another element of vibrancy and translations between world stratas, cycles. So I enjoy that pairing. Thanks, man.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking of artists back in the days.
Yeah.
Early, I don't know how far you want to go back when where they only understand things as atoms, like the simplest, smallest thing. And now today, you have like Brian Greene talking about like quantum theories and string theories, vibration, and like more smaller particles that we couldn't even access. So I was just sort of thinking the nature of reality too, and the work. Like for example, the screen interference, like that's a different nature reality, one that we're also very used to because we're so tied to our screen. But then now the screens are sort of like retina display where you don't even see those pixel anymore, right? It's like it's almost seamless in a way. And of course Google glasses coming and things like that. It's gonna just change our technological reality even more. So there's a lot of like lo-fi quality within this work here. A lot of tearing, there's just things like that I really appreciate. And just even the flow of water over print. That's just so poetic, so simple. And things that we sort of lose touch with. Like why do we still even call a PowerPoint slide? It's a slide. Like do people even know it's because we call it slide deck, and we do refer to
slide deck.
a slide today. Like you have your slide, your files, right? But that connection to technology, I'm just curious about how do you think about that in your practice with photography?
Yeah, I think with that one that you pointed out, I was playing around, so I guess I'm always interested in kind of making iterations of the same images in different ways and kind of thinking about how we understand it differently when it translates through different mediums or different processes. So in that case, that was 2 photographs that I had printed out, and I actually like spotlit them and was interested in the way that the light of the spotlight was refracting, like red was on one side, blue's on the other. It's kind of like the spectrum of light. And then rephotographed it, and then downloaded it, and then rephotographed it through my computer screen. So like these kind of artifacts. It's interesting what you said about like what becomes invisible depending on the medium. So if it wasn't a photographic print, I think we probably wouldn't notice that pixelation. But when it's then printed again, we start to notice these like, artifactings or like things that make us read it differently. Or I think for me it references memory in a way because it's like translated through these different processes.
I think there's also something I love about the rephotographed pieces is you're touching on this, like playing with our sense of what is reality and what we're looking at. It may seem like we're looking at one thing, but because you've done this, you've photographed something, printed it, rephotographed it, or manipulated it, then rephotographed it, we're seeing something entirely different than what we think we're looking at. And so I think in touching on like the technology question, I feel like it taps into like whether or not we can trust images in a way. And I think what you're doing is like, subtly talking about that in a really beautiful way. So
Yeah, I definitely like had this realization recently that I don't see like anything as a truth in a photograph, or I don't see a difference between a like landscape that's just captured in the world versus like a constructed landscape. And I'm always interested in those moments, which is kind of like the light coming in the window, like this like magical moment where you kind of get confused about what you're looking at. And you mentioned beauty earlier as this like way. I think beauty and also like illegibility can be a way to kind of confuse us in a way that becomes really productive actually. And like as a way to slow us down, because we're seeing so many images every day and like all of these different forms. So I like looking at something that makes me look at it in different ways. Like Adrienne, I'm looking at this piece here, and like I want to know what's underneath, like what you're hiding from us, like yeah.
Anybody in the audience, if you have any questions for our artist and curator here? Any thoughts?
I have a question for Adrienne. Yes. I just wondered if you would talk more about the torn paper, the photograph of the torn paper and then the torn paper, right? Where is that?
Yes. Thank you. Great question. And I think you also do this process too. There are three pieces that speak to each other. The print at the front, this mound of torn pieces, and then using the same imagery that I reprinted again and again and toned again and again, whatnot, and then tore the pieces that are torn in the 2D piece are a little mound of remembrance of what's left behind. So those are the torn pieces I didn't use in the pieces that you can touch and feel here later and curate yourself. So there was a sense where even the little bits, even the remains, even what I was going to discard has a place. And I should say that I'm quite fascinated by mounds and burials. So I was tearing and then placing, and then all of a sudden I had a whole nother, much more interesting project going on my right in many ways, which was another mound that was made of the discarded torn pieces. So those pieces really, I think, for me, speak to each other in terms of transformation, possibility, and the last piece, offering, is unfinished in the sense that it will never be behind glass or plexi. It will be recurated, reformatted. Hopefully, I will, or whoever desires to do so.
Yeah, definitely. As you were talking about this, and along me asking this question, I was looking over here, and now with our audience sitting below it, I was like, wow,
Yes.
those
They
feel like clouds to me. I'm like, your head's gonna get wet, you know. And so I love how it just transformed in just where it's positioned on the wall, and that, back to Anna's thought about water evaporation too, which is amazing. I've read somewhere in an article about like how much water we lost through evaporation, and as we get hotter and hotter as a planet, all that water will just be up in the air and then able to recapture again in ways. What other thoughts people have? Any other questions, thoughts? Yes.
I have a question for Anna. I'm curious how, you're coming up on your thesis semester in a few weeks, and so I'm curious how, like, what we're seeing here, which is work that's already been made, how your thesis work, what you're making now, is like building off of, or how you're thinking about things in like a new or different way. Can you kind of speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, thank you for that question. It's a good question because it's still evolving right now, but I think I'm, like, in my studio right now, there's a lot of things that are like fixed photographs, but I kind of recently just took them all off the walls, and I've been playing just with like translucent containers and light and water, so like kind of removing the actual like photographic record and just playing with those two materials and seeing how far I can kind of get with just that as like material and thinking about those as photographs. Yeah, so I'm playing around with like casting pieces of dirt like this, or like casting land and thinking of that cast as a photograph in like physical form. I think in the end it will probably be a mix of both, because I think like I get really excited when you can see the same image in different forms and different ways, and then they kind of speak to each other, and I think it gives them room to like not just exist as one moment in time, but kind of this reminder that things are always changing and can take on like many moments at the same time.
Yes.
I have a question for Adrienne. So for these two pieces on the right side, you use a lot of historical and then art history related images. I feel there are some like historical message or meaning that carry from there that you kind of intended for this piece. I feel maybe we didn't talk about that much, so I'm wondering. And also, you said that one is informing these pieces. I noticed some has tags like the writing, some doesn't. Like,
Yes.
what's the thought on that?
Yes, yes, both really great questions. I already had the slides in place. Of course, I'm curating 192 slides in my contact printer. So I'm constantly recurating them to get a different kind of effect from the cyanotype. But I do keep in mind the subject, and I guess ultimately whatever I framed in the pewter is the main event, so to speak. And one that seems very Grecian, it's a female figure. It happens to be, well, I'm not going to tell you who it is, but it's not who you think it is, or who the artist you might not come to unless you're a specialist in that, in reverse. But I was interested in the singular figure and the plurality of the other figure. So I did keep that in mind when I cast and decided to put the pewter cast slide, empty slide, through the etching press. So I was very interested in that pressure and defining. In terms of an art history message, I think I'd like to, I did not give that as much thought. I think I wanted to leave that up to the viewer. I think even if you're not familiar with these artworks from your own art history 101 or whatever you do when you travel, whatnot, I believe that there's still something to say because there's plenty of figurative work to relate to, whether it be Adam and Eve or a woman in a handkerchief head veil, or anyway, various things that are happening. So I think I was, in a sense, really honoring what I inherited. I am thinking about, I'm about to inherit a whole slew of photographic slides of photographs. There's only one among the cast pewter slides there, and it's the only one I had in 2000. So, and I'm also thinking about my own family history slides. So that'll take a turn, and will have a different kind of intention. But in a sense, I really was, I'm capturing what I inherited, like the slide librarian, in a sense, in a titillating way, if you want. Commemorating it. Yeah. And I think you asked a second question about the slides, how I came to those. The labels and non-labels. So some pieces I love to preserve, again, for commemoration, archival purposes, the handwriting on some of the labels. The red dot is for the positioning, the orientation when you put it in the slide carousel. So those were all actions, and they're meticulously made, whoever made the slide and the labels. I was interested in the different font. I could tell who was using a typewriter, who was using a laser printer on computer. So I wanted to maintain that temporality and that legacy to the slide. Sometimes they're interesting, sometimes the location is interesting, wherever they might be, of what collection they're coming from. But when I lose the slide, I turn it over and I have a black part of the slide, and it creates a different kind of framing. It's more dramatic, it's striking, and it lives in a different way. And I would play off of that, positive, negative, right? Dark and light, again, as an invitation to think about the no longer transparency, which is shining so beautifully down in Anna's piece, for instance. So I just believe we have so many beautiful methods and conversations. I hope that answered your question. Yes.
I mean, I see the processing of the slide too, where the filaments go through liquid and water.
Yes.
Very similar to some of the quality of the Humana's piece here too, where the water, the embodiments, there's so many metaphors that can come through it. So, yeah, beautiful. Do you have any other questions? Anybody else? Well, I have one last question.
Yes.
One last question is, let's bring this back to light. And,
yes.
So for everybody here, including myself, what is your favorite light to photograph, and why?
I'll start.
Yeah.
I love this question because I think I love all sorts of light. In my own work, I do a lot of photographing without a camera, so working with light sensitive material and light directly, but kind of bypassing the camera. So I think a lot of the light I'm drawn to is sunlight when it's intense enough to create a record. I work with cyanotype, so the process that Adrienne is using as well. So like a late morning, full sunny day is just really, I feel like there's lots of potential. And it creates such harsh shadows that I'm always really drawn to. So I think that when I'm taking a photograph, I think early morning light that's coming into like a house, kind of passing through architecture in some way, I'm also really drawn to. So yeah.
I love that. I have a similar. Yeah, I feel like it's like photographers aren't supposed to love bright midday sun, but it's kind of my favorite. At least since living in New Mexico, I think like it's something about like the dry air. Like there's not really much catching the light in the air, so I guess like these two come to mind, where I'm kind of like wrapping a print around these tumbleweeds in my yard and thinking about the way that the shadow is like stronger than the actual physical object, so you can actually like see more clearly the reflection or like the shadow of something, which I hadn't thought about in connection to cyanotype, but that makes a lot of sense too. It's kind of the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're working at the same time of day.
Yeah. Midday, hot sun,
Yeah.
hard to see.
Yeah.
Yes, I would, well, similarly, because I know I can count to get something on that very, very bright sun, but I'm thinking too all kinds of light as well, because where there's light, there's going to be a lot of darkness. And I love that high key, which you get both during lots of light, but what is not revealed is even more interesting to me half the time, part of the time. Yes, yeah, to get that nice tension, that mystery, that the visible and the invisible, all in play, which is what we're doing in all of our processes.
We need
no,
light.
Oh, your light,
Yeah,
yes.
my light.
Yeah,
Well,
your light.
you know, I'm thinking of the same thing too. I actually don't like harsh sunlight, but because I use a 19th century process called daguerreotype, and that's the best light for me to photograph in. And it seems that intensity of the light is able to sort of just like burn itself onto the silver plate too. But these days, you know, I mean, I kind of really enjoy the winter light. I think because we're here in California, and as we all know, photographer and most of social media, like you know, the golden hours because it looks great, it's warm, and it seems to be during the winter that that hour is just much longer, and it starts a little sooner too, like just like you know, even at 2 o'clock. You could start feeling it, right? It's sort of magical.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Such like an emotional aspect to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it goes back to Emily
The
Dickinson's
poem,
poem
yeah.
too. You know, it's certain.
The winter light.
Long slide. Yes.
Yeah, so.
Cyanotype, the photographic chemical used here, typically you need to fix it so it remains permanent and no longer light sensitive. So I was just working with the material sort of as paint, as like watercolor almost, and painting with it, not fixing it, not rinsing it afterwards. And so the print itself, while I was painting it, or this painting while I was creating it, was kind of transforming because of the UV light in the space that I was in, transforming in front of me as I was creating it. So I think these works are a lot more about my process of creating it than the final piece. But I like that because they remained unfixed, though they can technically keep changing, and they're not permanent, although I've had some for almost 10 years now, and they haven't changed much since. So yeah, but I like the sense that they're not permanent, they're not fixed, and they could go away technically. They're ephemeral. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That reminds me of this one story about Louis Daguerre. It's just another myth about Louis Daguerre, told by the mayor of Paris, where Daguerre's diorama is located, where there was a story about Louis Daguerre was resting on a sofa, looking at a light that's coming through the blinds, and looking at one of his paintings. And then he noticed the shadows of the trees on the painting. And then the next day he realized that shadow is still there on the painting. And he just wondered, well, how come that shadow hasn't moved yet? And then he realized that he probably mixed iodine within some of his paint.
Oh.
And then the silver and the iodines made it
Yeah.
sort of like this. Art historians don't believe the story. But
Yeah.
another, a lot of Louis de Guerre magical story, but I was definitely thinking about not fixing it. So.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your attention.